Good evening, viewers. Happy New Year. Welcome to the first episode of our new series that we've announced this year. And that series is called Being Well and Well-Being. It's brought to you by Proho.in in association with Nuva L&T LLP. And in this inaugural session, we have with us Sanjeev Roy. Sanjeev da, as I fondly call him, has over three and a half decades of experience in advertising, branding, communication. He's the CEO of Bullseye Inc. He's an executive coach and an organizational development consultant. He's also the co-author of the book, Here Today, Here Tomorrow. Besides this, Sanjeev da serves in the advisory board of various institutions, including NIIT Foundation. And as an aside, I thought I'd mention this, share this with all our viewers, that Sanjeev da and I had been working on multiple interventions these past 8 or 9 months. And in fact, today, uncannily, is the day when we are sharing this live virtual platform. And today is when we also finalized our formal relationship. So Sanjeev da, a very warm welcome to the show.
Thank you, Avik. Absolutely delighted to be here.
And with Sanjeev da, we also have with us Rajesh Gangwani. Like Sanjeev da, Rajesh has over 3 decades of experience in advertising and branding, when he has served some of the largest brands around that we can think of, including the Tata Group, Reliance, Aditya Birla Group, ITC, Godrej Group, Hindustan Lever, Landmark Group, and the list goes on. He had served earlier as a managing partner at J. Walter Thompson's Western India operations, so that's Mumbai and Western India. And currently he works as an executive coach, corporate speaker and trainer, as well as a branding and communication consultant. Rajesh, a very warm welcome to the show.
Thank you, Avik. Thanks, Sanjeev, and lovely to be with Sanjeev and you on this show.
Great. So, Sanjeev da, without further ado, let's get started. This is something that we'd been talking for a while now, but if we look at the back end of last year and even this year, and we look at the gamut, the entire spectrum of publications across the board that deal with leadership or deal with business, or particularly that deal with HR, we see, I'm going to qualify it, we see almost like a surf eat, a plethora of surveys that abound, right? With different kinds of insights that we bring out, which can be great, which can also be a little overwhelming. And I know that your organization has actually carried out systematically at 4 different slots, right? Multiple different surveys right through last year, all the way from, I think, June, July till December, Jan. And it'll be great, I think, for all our viewers to hear some of the insights from that survey, from that leadership survey or series of surveys.
Thank you, Avik. Yes, the surveys, we started the surveys because we wanted to understand. It all happened because at that time, most of us were grappling and trying to understand what was happening. So we wanted to get a real sense. There were things we were picking up from programs we were running, but we wanted to be sure. And so that's how it started. And we started in June, and because of the work we do, it was focused on leadership, aspects of leadership, but we spoke not just to leaders, but also to people that they lead, because leadership means nothing except what is experienced by people that you lead. So that's why we ran those, we started with that survey, and then we said to really track what's happening, because things evolve so fast through this whole period of 10 months, 11 months, whatever it is now, things have changed quite rapidly. And we wanted to track what was happening, so we kept doing them over a period of time. Mm-hmm. And it's very interesting the way what we know, there's a lot that we already know, and everybody knows. But some of the things that we found, there were things that changed and there were things that didn't through this period. And one of those things was that people have actually got a lot more comfortable and operationally in this whole work from home or virtual working, or hybrid working, that kind of situation. It wasn't like that in the beginning. There was a lot of angst, there was a lot of stress, but that's gradually kind of evened out on the operational side. So people are more comfortable doing it, things like, somebody's laptop, somebody's internet connection, space at home, all of those kind of things people have been able to figure out. So organizations have done what they needed to do. That's got sorted out. Something that we've heard right from the beginning was about how the office had come into the personal space, and that whole demarcation between home and office had kind of started disappearing. It looked like something that people again would get used to, and and if we were from our service, I know that there are some organizations which have already done things around it, but that as an issue, as one of the major issues of working from home and leadership issues around that has remained. That really over the last 7 months, in fact, even in the last survey that we did, which was only with CEOs, very interestingly, it corroborates the challenges around that in a very different way. But that's one of those issues that's remained. What we also, through this period, the things that we were tracking is, what is it that's required for somebody to really work well, successfully at this? And, you can bracket it in three different spaces. The first is, anybody who's working virtually. These are some of the things that now become very important. Anybody who's working virtually, whether you're a leader, whether you're somebody who's being led, there are some things, there's some muscles that you just have to develop now. One of them is being personally very organized, because right now there's no office, there's nothing else.
Right.
So it's all up to you. So that personal organization, that ability to organize yourself personally, knowing where all your documents are, how to get started, hey, what's the schedule, all of that has become very important. The other big thing is around self-reliance. Okay, so one aspect of it is, of course, the physical aspect of that. You're there, even if you want your cup of tea, you've got to go and get it. You have to do all the stuff that you need to do yourself. But more importantly, adapting, learning, these are things that the onus on the individual to do a lot of it themselves has gone up. Okay, so self-reliance is one of those things that's very important as a skill to develop to be able to work virtually. The third very important thing, of course, is clear communication. Because now that you're virtual, there's so much of it that happens in text and email, or when you're talking. Sometimes you're speaking with your video off, you can't see. The necessity for clarity in communication has never been high. So that's sort of that bucket around virtual. And then if you think of what leaders are expecting from the people in terms of differences, there are a lot of things that people expect. But if you were to just track, when we track, what is it that leaders are actually saying they want? And there's some very interesting things here. One, of course, is that they expect that people are going to learn and learn very quickly. Okay? And the interesting thing is that they expect that of themselves as well, because everybody is in that phase. There's nobody who's different.
Right.
But the need to learn and learn quickly, that's become one important skill that one needs to look at. Adapting. Leaders expect that their people, their teams will adapt, to different structures, different schedules, different role definitions, different ways of doing things, because it's kept evolving, constantly changing. So they want people to adapt very quickly. And building that muscle of being adaptable is not that easy. It takes a lot to get to that space where you can say, okay, today it's this, tomorrow it's that. And so, but that's an expectation that's there now. The third is, what you might loosely call innovation, but in the context of what leaders are expecting, it's a lot around solutioning. Okay, so you find yourself in spaces, in places, things are different, find a solution. Don't always expect the answer to come from something. Think creatively. Think out of the box and find solutions. So that's the other thing. The fourth major thing is around collaboration. And that's interesting, because here you are, people are sitting all alone. Okay? So they're alone, and the need for collaboration has never been higher. Because that's how you've got to be able to make collaboration work virtually, you have to work that much harder. Yeah?
Right.
Because the comfort of the physical space, going and patting somebody on the back, that's not there. So, and everybody has to do that. It's not the task of, this person has to make this happen. No. Every single person now has to be able to develop the skills of being a good collaborator. It means, all those skills around working with influence, the whole relational skills bit, the human aspects
Yeah, yeah,
of
absolutely.
working.
Sanjeev, we'll come back for more insights. It's going over to Rajesh. So
Yeah.
over the past 3+ decades, right, working with some of the household brands in India as well as internationally, like Nike, you've had, and this is the great thing with branding, advertising people as well as consultants, is that you get a ringside seat into what's actually happening in the sector. And from that standpoint, if you reviewed last year, the year of the pandemic, and where we are today, how do you see the emergent workplace? How do you view it?
Thanks, Avik. And one of the words that we've used been used a lot is resilience, of course. But
Mm-hmm,
the word I think, which is probably very definitive of what has happened in the last 1 year, and it's probably going to be a key defining feature in the workplace, is this whole thing of hybrid. And I know there's a lot being said about it, but I think it's true to a large extent. And I think underneath that is the whole element of flexibility today. I think the pandemic has, and like Sanjeev said, a lot has changed today, and you're suddenly on your own, and you're used to working at your own rhythm, and that means today the whole notion of flexibility is extremely important. And organizations today are thinking in terms of how do we look at our structures, how do we look at our processes, how do we look at the talent that we hire, what is our talent hiring and retention process, how much
mm-hmm,
flexibility can you imbibe in all of that. And take this work from home concept. I think today there's always a sort of divided opinion on whether it's a very immediate response to what is going on, or is it something that is going to be here to stay. The sense that I get talking to people is that it is definitely something which is medium to long term. It's not a short term thing, and most organizations today have realized the advantages and the benefits. Even organizations that were very initially in a frame of mind to say no, it cannot happen. We are not traditionally a company that would ever encourage people to work completely out of home. The same
mm-hmm,
organizations today are sort of saying that there is a midway, and I think this whole element, let's find a way in between, and the model that often gets spoken about is this 3-2-2 model, where 3 days of being in the office, 2 days working at home, and 2 days of leave, or whatever version of that. But
mm-hmm,
clearly,
mm-hmm,
be some kind of hybrid structure clearly emerging. And many companies today are, and I think some of the IT companies were easier, and we were discussing with Sanjeev the other day, that it's probably easier for the IT companies to move there. They had already announced, the Googles and the Microsofts of the world had clearly sort of set the tone for that. But a lot of other companies, even the service industry, even the manufacturing sector, are talking in terms of some kind of model which relies on people spending time at home and coming to work. And therefore, the need, therefore, to look at home office support. And most houses today, as we know, especially in the metro cities, are not geared to become offices overnight. Uh,
mm-hmm,
and very often we saw that, and I remember posting a picture on Facebook saying, "This is what we had a whole bed with lots of 3-4 laptops for the whole family with wires and all kinds of devices." It takes some doing to start creating a space that you think is work, because those are the things that we have in mind. But most organizations today are looking at some kind of home office kind of support things to be provided. The second thing I think is the word agility. Now again, it was there pre-pandemic, and it's something that was already a trend. And the pandemic, if at all, has only accelerated and accentuated this whole aspect of agility. And
mm-hmm,
most organizations today are looking at seriously how do we really work on that. And this work from home actually, in a way, is actually helping and enabling this whole aspect of agility. So that's going to be there for sure. And technology is the other big driver that is helping this whole sense of agility. what happens to wellness and emotional wellness, which I know is the theme, is something that we can discuss as we go along. But I think two big trends of hybrid nature and flexibility, and the other part of agility. I think these are going to be the two key drivers in the emergent workspace.
Right. Absolutely. Um, Sanjeev, back to you. If we're talking about coaching or consulting or any kind of an advisory practice, that entire thing rests upon the requirements and the needs of the client, right? And if we look back at the year of the pandemic, and again, what we're looking at now going forward, how do you see that over the years, the needs or maybe the key questions that stakeholders, that executives are asking, has that changed? So the question that you're hearing from the clients, how is that materially different from what it was
Yeah, I think,
pre-pandemic?
I mean, the first thing in something like this is that all of these kind of interventions are, they have their maximum kind of potency when there is this whole transition and change is underway. And what we are seeing is change on multiple variables. It's not like one thing that's changing, but everything is changing. And so with CEOs, what's happening is that they are in this space, or the leadership, they're in that space where very often they're playing blind, right? So it isn't as if all the answers are there. And like we were discussing, Rajesh, that it's not, they're just human beings, right? So they have their own insecurities, they have their own fears, but they're CEOs. I mean, they don't see themselves, particularly in the context in our country, where people are not allowed to make mistakes. So leaders don't see themselves as people who can really even share what they feel or think, or something they say becomes like the thing to do. So in that context, the kind of things that in coaching conversations that have come is, I mean, the leaders' whole thing around questioning themselves, and that's the process that we help. Okay, so to build this whole idea of your own self, get to that space which is authentic, that allows you to be both strong and vulnerable at the same time. That's very critical, because this vulnerability is important in terms of building trust and building the human face, and so on and so forth. And leaders do it, leads by example. They also have all of this question. Everybody understands intellectually that, yes, empathy, because that's a word that's going around. Empathy, resilience, all of this, they understand.
They've suddenly become very chic, very cool. I mean, you have to use that if you're at a boardroom or even a virtual boardroom.
But what does it actually mean? How do you practice it? Yeah. What does it mean in that person? Am I that kind of person? Am I empathetic? Do I have to do? So these are kind of things that we're dealing with. We're helping, in conversations where I'm helping at least folks unpack that for themselves, understand what empathy in action would mean for each of them. A big challenge that leaders have, leaders typically, they are slightly older, have more experience, have been successful at what they've done, therefore there is that belief in things that they've done. So for them, unlearning is very difficult. Yeah. So your views get formed and so on and so forth, and yet this whole period is about challenging and questioning everything, and that's the change. And again, something that you understand intellectually, but putting it in practice is quite a challenge. So those are the kind of issues that one is discussing with them. There are also this whole new thing that's developed at this time. It was there. I used to do a lot of that work before, which is with people in terms of reimagining their futures. But now that has become like a real life question for many people. Okay, so what next? And so how to reimagine your future? How do you look at your whole skill base? How do you think of an alternative career if you need to, alternative careers if you need to?
Sanjeev, just slight interjection. You mentioned vulnerability, and I wonder, when you coach your executives, right, the CXOs, the fundamental question, right, to feel vulnerable is one thing. The second is to show vulnerability. Is it kosher to show vulnerability? If that question, when that question comes to you, how do you answer that?
So they start with I start with Our discussions are, I work with the assumption and I try and explain to people why it's kosher to show vulnerability, because their starting point is you cannot show vulnerability. Okay? You, the coach, are here. With you, I'm okay. Okay, because
Right.
this is
How
a
can I
safe
show it to
space.
my team? How can
How
I
can
show
I
it
show
before
it?
my
That's
juniors or my peers
that's right.
or people
And so
down the
when
line?
that question, right, and that's when we start discussing what empathy means.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Hmm.
and that if that's, and they understand, and then we say that we discuss that if empathy is what you've got to drive in your leadership, okay,
Right.
you've got to take the lead and show that.
Yes.
So, and therefore you have to show that it's okay to have your doubts, and
Hmm.
it's
Hmm.
okay to feel insecure, and it's okay to share what you feel.
Right. Right.
Okay, I mean,
Exactly.
obviously,
Yes.
you've got to
Within
recognize
within within boundaries, within
it.
limits of.
All of that. I mean, that people understand as
Yeah.
to how they. But just to
Exactly. Because I
cross
think the
that
question
particular
is more
bridge,
fundamental for them. Should I even show it or not? Am I even
that's
allowed to feel it? Right? Am I even allowed to exhibit it on my sort of micro expressions or my behavior? Right?
that's
Is a more fundamental block that we need to cross. I think
that's right.
that's the
That's
big
right. Yeah.
hurdle.
And
Right.
once people, what happens, like in anything else, anything with behavior change, that once you experience some success,
Hmm.
it gives you the motivation to go further down that road
Absolutely. Absolutely.
and do more of
Yes.
it.
Hmm.
So yes, I mean, these are sort of fairly fundamental changes, huh? In our context, in the Indian context, this is a big change. It's not a
Yes.
small change.
Yes, exactly. So, on that same note of change, Rajesh, in your earlier response, you talked about emotional intelligence, you talked about resilience, you talked about agility, right? Now, traditionally, in all sectors, right, even in sectors as sort of liberated and advanced as branding and communication and advertising and publicity and so forth, right? Typically, traditionally, we would recruit, any company would recruit going by education qualifications, some basic aptitude that you can test across the counter, right? Across the table. And you would look at domain expertise, you would look at industry expertise. And all of these things, right? Like resilience and emotional intelligence and grit and so forth, were all relegated into one little corner bucket called soft skills, right? Now, in the experience, in the wake of the pandemic, when you're talking to clients and when you're talking to people in the ecosystem, when you're talking to stakeholders, is it still that same feeling that they carry? Is it that same hangover of the earlier feeling that they carry? Or has there been a change? Or is there now starting to be a change in their perception of these soft skills?
Yeah, it's interesting you speak about soft skills because I've sort of always struggled when you ask people, so what really qualifies as a soft skill? So the other sort of option that you have is, okay, there are technical skills and there are non-technical skills. So I had a client recently who said, we want to do training for our employees on non-technical skills because the bulk of the work that they do is technical skills. So by definition, the alternative by definition is non-technical skills,
Non-technical.
non-technical, so which is still sort of clunky. But this I was interesting part that I was reading about soft skills, and this whole thing goes back into the late 1960s, and it came from the US military, where they said machines do some work, which is really the hard work. That's hard work, and the rest of the people where you need human interaction to make people work better with the machines, that's called soft skills. And for some strange reason that's continued today. And I was thinking, what's happened during the course of this long journey is that human beings have become machines, right? In ways, it started with machines and humans. Now humans have become machines, and now we are moving to a stage where we are saying the machines are going to take over. And, so it's scary. And there was an interesting thing I heard the other day about in Japan. There's some study apparently where they said critical care patients, and when we and you know that there's a lot of elderly population in Japan, and
Mhm.
apparently they were given a choice whether they would choose machines for their critical care or human beings, and surprisingly they chose machines and trusted machines
Okay.
to give critical care. Now
All
this
right.
is really scary because what we are saying
Mhm.
is we are losing touch with being humans. And I think
And
Sanjeev mentioned
losing the trust as well. So you don't depend. Not only do you not depend or rely on them, you don't trust them. The trust factor goes
trust
down.
factor away. So therefore, all the more reason today, and I would prefer to call them human skills rather than soft skills. And probably no better time than this to look back and reset and recalibrate about how critical and important these human skills are. Given the fact that the big force of technology and with the robots coming and how many jobs will be lost, but some really desperately hold on to our human skills.
Absolutely. I mean, and if we look at it, if we look, for example, at many of the think tank papers, including the latest report on the future of the skills or the future of work developed by the World Economic Forum, it says that if you look back traditionally, maybe 20 or 30 years, right, it's a kind of a spindle kind of a shape where you at each end you have technical skills and non-technical skills who are the specialists, and the more sort of oblong part of it, right, the inflated part of that spindle is where you had the generalists. And now it's becoming more like a dumbbell. So this part is like thinning out, and
Right.
you have to have specialist skills. So either technical specialist skills, you're talking about coders and programmers and designers and data architects and scientists, and on the other hand, it's the non-technical or the human skills that you talked about, right? So Rajesh, going back to that anecdote that you shared with us, very interesting, where the client is saying, okay, we want to do training for non-technical skills. Do you think that this is purely anecdotal, or do you think that this is going to be part of the trend that we will now see in 2021 and beyond?
Um, I think it's big parts of it's really both. Clearly, the predominant spends go towards technical skills, and even in organizations today, with things becoming digital so fast, most companies today, if you really were to ask and put a finger on what's the most important thing we need to get our people, and especially now in the virtual format, even more so. So, how do we get people to work efficiently, productively, with agility in remotely? So, therefore, I think everybody needs to be equipped in that domain first. But yes, interestingly, what has happened, and Sanjeev mentioned that today this whole pandemic has allowed us to reassess where we stand. The fact that we need to be vulnerable. And I was, while Sanjeev was speaking, I was thinking today, and probably we need a scale of degrees of vulnerability. Really, I mean, no one really is going to say, yeah, how much do I really open out and how much can I really become vulnerable? But clearly, there is a sense today of connecting with yourself and not knowing all the answers. And if you don't know all the answers, you need to reach out, you need to connect, you need to collaborate, and all that is not going to be part of your technical skills. So I guess there is a shift that I see happening, where people are at least talking about it openly. See, there's somewhere there is the thing about how do we actually make it more experiential, and rather than just leave it to technical training. And I see people talking about saying learning is not equal to training today. Earlier said, just let's do some time management skills or stress management skills and do a
Right.
training. But I think the focus now is learning, and how can we truly learn and imbibe
That's
experience?
very
Yeah.
yes, yes.
Yeah. Can I say something, Avik?
Yeah,
I mean, very
please,
short.
please, please go ahead.
This is an area of passion. So, the if you think a little further ahead, like I like to think a little further ahead, and you imagine that the machines are replacing a lot of this very basic human tasks. And today we are already seeing that in customer care and things like that. Machines
Yes.
are
The
even in
repetitive tasks, the routine tasks being replaced,
are
increasing by automation. Yes.
increasing automation and this and so on. If it takes it away, so what does it leave for humans? What is it that humans can still do better than the machines? And it is back to all of those things around relationships, empathy, yeah, inspiring things which are totally human. So
Creativity.
yeah, creativity. So that's where, so human skills is it. I mean, that's the future
Right.
of this
Exactly.
side of the dumbbell, as you put it. Yeah.
Of one end of it. Right. Shojibda, and if you compare where we are right now in Jan, vis-a-vis, let's say, the deep dark days of the extended lockdown, where we had literally one phase after the other of lockdowns, and we weren't really sure when we were going to really come out of it, right? If you map this scenario to what we had 6 or 7 months back, uh, this is not just a much better place to be in. There seems to be a semblance of euphoria. There's no other word for it, across the board, right? And vaccinations are underway in all the major economies, including in India, one of the most ambitious in the world. The economy, going by what the pundits are saying, is exhibiting a hockey stick like, or I don't know what stick like kind of recovery, right? We have the exit of Donald J. Trump. So lots of good news for the world as a whole, right? And from an industry perspective, as we said at the outset of the program, there is this new espousal, this new advocacy for hybrid models of working, or for WFH, right, work from home models of work. Is there a danger that we are kind of getting carried away with this euphoria? Are there underlying tensions and subtextual challenges that are not coming to the fore because we are clinging to these new comfort zone or these new formulae?
Yes. That very good question. Okay. Again, I'm going to go back to the research that the surveys that we've run, and also to some experiences that one has working directly with clients now. Remember, I told you how there were some underlying things in the research that about the issues that were there, which kept cropping up, have remained right through. Okay, they haven't got addressed. That's one. The other is that very recently we ran a survey only for CEOs, founders, owners, which is to get a sense of how are they thinking and how are they reacting, and what do they see. So yes, the euphoria is there. So along with it, and yes, they say that operationally things have got better. But at the same time, this group, a majority of them, say that they don't know what the issue with employee engagement is. And there is a big issue there. They admit that there is a big issue, but they don't know what it is and how to crack it. And they don't know how to crack it. That's one. The other is that they understand that going forward, because in terms of strategy, the mind stuff, they've sort of got some sense. Yeah, they understand that going forward, talent, the kind of things that are required may well be different, but they really don't know what that difference is. Okay, so that's one part of it. So the whole people around the people, there are some questions. The other is that through this period, companies have actually done some really amazing stuff. I mean, the way that they've got up, everybody's got a story to tell about what they did during this time and how they sort of went out of their comfort zones and so on and so forth.
Right.
Leaders need to understand whether this is something that they can take forward. So that's another, and what of this can they take forward? Is their leadership and the people really ready for what is now being called the great acceleration? Okay, where are people? Is the leadership team ready? I mean, do they have the resilience? Are they ready for change? Or is it, like you said, the comfort zone? So there are some people who are euphoric because they think it's going to be same old, same old. They're going to get back to where it was. And this is amongst the leaders. There are those who say that we've already found the answer and this is it. So this is going to be comfortable. Whereas underlying this, whatever they're describing as comfortable, and they're saying is fine, it's actually not fine. So these things, it's very, very important for organizations to good hard look at themselves and say, okay, here we are. Where are we? Let's examine ourselves. Let's look at our purpose. Let's look at our values. Let's look at our leadership. Let's do some assessment and figure out whether we're in the right space. Exactly. Does that answer your question, Avik?
Yes, because the challenge seems to be, right? So take work from home as one primary example, right? Initially there were huge disruptions and huge kind of problems and people saying, no, this is not going to work, and detractors and people debating and arguing about it. And now that they've found a way to make it work, now they're going to be extremely reluctant to move away from this, even to try a 3-2-2. Even a 3-2-2 is a variation of this. It is a change from this.
Yeah.
let alone a scenario when, let's say, in August, and you really have 300 million people who've had an immunizing jab in the arm, a couple of doses, and then everybody says, yes, now it's not just kosher, but we should get back to office. That's going to be a huge mindset shift for them, and one that I don't think that they're going to take very lightly or take very pleasantly at that point, right?
No, that's right. I mean, change, as we know, is always difficult, and there's been so much change. And right now, people are saying that, okay, human beings look for stability. And that's like a very uh, natural thing that most people look for, away from the chaos, safe. And this constant change is difficult, but that's what the new normal means, and that's what the world ahead will be. So yes, organizations need to take a good hard look and ask themselves the question: are they ready for whatever
Exactly.
it is that they have to
Exactly.
do in the times ahead?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Rajesh, we've spent a fair bit talking about executives and stakeholders and CXOs. Let's also talk about the young generation. You know, the not just the millennials who are in the workplace, but maybe the Gen Zs who are, you know, passing out of the premier institutes with full of hope and poised to get into the workplace. Right now, you've been a faculty and a speaker at various premier institutes, including the IIMs, the ISBs, Wellington Institute, etc. So if you look at it from the student standpoint, those who are poised to join the workplace in a year like the pandemic, when everything has been disrupted, what do you gauge is the impact of this entire experience on their psyche, on their well-being, on their sense of hope or lack of it? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what's your general view? What's your gauge of the situation for the younger
Yeah, we
generation?
can I'll probably share a personal incident. My son graduated in 2020. He was in the US, and it was heartbreaking for him that there was no ceremony for his graduation, and we
Hmm.
travel, and that didn't happen. So, I mean, he said that in jest, right? We are being called the batch of COVID 2019. We are not being called the batch of 2020. So I guess the young people today are in a bit of a situation where they're feeling that, look, there are jobs, of course, there are job losses happening. Even some of the companies have backed out from the offers that they had given to people. So there is some amount of uncertainty there. I know, for instance, a lot of young people today are joining companies, and it's weird that you're joining virtually. And a lot of
Yeah.
times onboarding, while it seems okay, I mean, we are living in a different times, but imagine not knowing the first day of your work. You really are in a little screen. You're talking to people. You don't know whether you belong. Who do you speak to? And there is a little moment of that whole transition phase is difficult. And I know companies are trying hard. The HR teams are trying hard. There are gift hampers coming with welcome aboard. And those things are now happening. But clearly, one of the things that seems to be on my mind is, if you're trying to create bonding and loyalty and integration into the company culture, how much are you doing that through this whole process where people are hiding behind windows? You have to draw them out. You have to tell them what the company stands for. So I think these are some of the challenges that companies are facing today, and young people are facing today when they join companies. And are they being heard? Do they really know what's going around? For instance, if you're not physically in that premise, you're away, you're feeling isolated, you don't know who your peer group is. So there are I suspect challenges of onboarding. What's also happened, I think, is the element of stress. And I was reading this whole little piece that came in the Economic Times the other day about how there's been substance abuse and there's been high levels of stress management, more than
Hmm.
50% here. And I know there are people. It's not to say that only it's the young people. Or maybe there are senior executives as well, but people are going through some amount of stresses, and they are reaching out. Luckily, companies today they had already started it, but now they're forced to now really look at it and address these issues. So, for instance, in Bangalore, there's a company called One to One Help.net, and it's completely confidential. You can reach out to them and talk to what's going, the whole insecurity piece, or whatever is bothering you. So I think companies now have no choice but to be proactive and create systems where people can find ways to express what they're going through without worrying about whether somebody will know what I'm talking about. So I think that's extremely progressive. That's what is going on. And I think companies are also smart, and they've realized that you have to be in touch with, especially the younger people. It's no longer about job titles and designations and roles. Really, who is the person behind that job title and role? Because otherwise, you run the risk of that person actually going to Glassdoor and actually completely venting out.
Yes.
And I know for a fact that some companies actually have a loosely defined project going on, saying how do we make sure that employees, quote unquote, say the right things when they go to Glassdoor, because that affects company reputation, and especially in times like these where sensitivities are high. You do not want to be caught on the wrong foot where employees are saying this is a company where organizations are not very sensitive to what people are feeling. So all that is actually going on when we talk of young people.
Right, exactly. And going back to what you were saying, I was having this conversation yesterday with someone in the UK who is a mentor for one of the private universities there in the south of England. And it's striking because he said exactly the same thing, because it seems to be endemic. So you're not just talking about students here in India or in the US, and had a conversation with that in the UK. It's purely endemic. He's saying tremendous amount of substance abuse, tremendous amount of the isolation, the alienation, loneliness, depression, to the extent of suicidal tendencies. And we were talking about that's something that we'll come to during the conclusion part of our session. We're talking about measures of evaluating or assessing their mental health or well-being or lack of it, in terms of depression, dejection, anxiety, to the extent that people can actually take sort of preventive measures before something drastic happens, maybe like psychological counseling or a helpline that the university has. So that's clearly something that's quite alarming, terrifying, really. In terms of, please.
Sorry, I'd like to make a quick one. And we and Sanjeev were speaking about it. Both of us are advertising people, and we were discussing, especially in the service sector, advertising, media, public relations, entertainment, hospitality. A lot of these industries feed on social interaction, right? And yeah, I can understand some sectors like the IT industry is happy and it works very beautifully without really the virtual mode. But a lot of companies thrive and flourish on social interaction. And somewhere, if you have to handle that, and you have to handle that piece, maybe keep few days just for people to come and do that bonding, be part of the culture, have those water cooler conversations. It's extremely vital for mental wellness and emotional wellness.
Yeah, exactly. In this, there was one of the questions. Let's have Oritro's question up, because I thought it's kind of germane to this. Yeah. So while you're reading this, I'll quickly paraphrase it. This goes back to the two ends of the dumbbell that we talked about, right? The human skills and the highly sort of evolved technical skills. If you're just talking about the human skills, if I sort of reinterpret this question, the question is saying that how would the market evaluate the pure human-centric skills? Okay, because or going forward, is there a big enough market for it? I might be highly resilient, I might be highly imaginative, creative as a person, innovative, etc., right? But if there is no market evaluation for this, how do I get employed?
Sure. Let me take a shot at it.
Yeah, sure. Please.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. So this organizations had already started looking at assessments of, let's not call it soft skills any longer, but human skills before, right? But the need to do that right now has become that much higher. And yes, HR people are beginning to realize it. So to answer Oritro's question, yes, there are ways in which this can be measured and assessed. So, and that's what assessment tools are for. And Avik, what you have is a pretty fine one as far as that goes. So that's one. Yes, it's possible to measure. Is this what organizations will want? Increasingly so. Okay, so more and more, this is something that's going to be very, very important for organizations to look at. They're already beginning to realize it. They will do it. The third thing for young people to think of and remember is that the way careers are going to be going forward is going to be very different from what it was earlier. Okay, our parents belong to a generation where they joined a place, it was a job, it was the career, it was life, and they ended, and that's where they came out of. Okay, our generation started, all three of us here are people who at some point of time got out of it and did something else, and are doing so. So like there's a second innings or a second career or something like this. The generation that is now coming in is going to have multiple careers. It's not going to be one thing. The thing that will be constant, so it's something today, it's going to be something else tomorrow, maybe two things at the same time, and something else day after, because things are going to change very rapidly. What will remain constant in all of this is who you are. Okay, what is it that you bring to the table as a human being, that human part of you, which is where this assessment comes in, and which is why these soft skills are very important. And these are all things that everybody is beginning to realize. So this is, we're going through that phase, and as we go through this time, people are going to realize and recognize all this more, and the need for measuring all of this and to give it precedence is going to be a lot higher. It's already pretty high. It's just going to get higher and higher, because this period, this last 1 year, has taught everybody the importance of human skills.
Rajesh, you want to weigh on this?
Yeah, I'll pick up on what Sanjeev said about who you are. And I think that's such an important point. And what you see around you is a lot of young people asking themselves who they are. I mean, and that question probably was never something that they would be thinking about in day to day. And which is why there is no surprise that you have a lot of spiritual teachers, monks, becoming, and if you see some of the sessions of some of the teachers, young spiritual teachers, their audience is young people, and these are people who are actually saying, can it be packaged in a manner for me to grasp and understand of who am I, and what do I need to do to wade through all this uncertainty,
Right.
And it's very it's amazing some of the what you see around the monks and the teachers who are really packaging it beautifully through videos, and and they're doing corporate sessions, and they are really holding the mirror today for people to say, is there a way which we haven't considered before? Equally soft skills, that's exactly the domain of soft skills, but it's being delivered in a different way.
Exactly. Yeah, Sanjeev, you talked about, so this has to do with, I'm going to take a cue of who am I, and I'm going to try and map this to something that you said, we're talking about measuring instruments, right, or tools. Now, you have used various forms of psychometrics and measuring tools in your coaching practice throughout your career. And I know that you also have your own framework, you have your own competency-based 360-degree assessment that you've used for corporate clients. Now, in this new sort of emergent paradigm, right, do they themselves need to be revisited? And what are the new kinds of things that you are looking for in your practice as a coach that you want to go to market with? And how would you go about doing that?
Thank you. Yes. Yes. So, I mean, there are a lot of, I now call them the legacy assessment tools, right? What exists, and they have their uses. I mean, they've had their uses all of this while, and I've used them. I still use some of them for various things in terms of self-development, in terms of understanding self. There's a lot that's out there. It's based on, and most of it, as you know, is based on studying psychologies and pathologies, as it's called. I mean, issues and challenges that people have, and so you study it and you created things around it, which is fine. I mean, because it's given a framework, we've done all of that. Today, what we're seeing is that there are a whole new set of things which have become very important. Okay, the whole focus on mental well-being, it was always important, okay, but it wasn't spotlighted as it has been now.
Mhm.
And
Yes.
because of that spotlighting, mental well-being is very important. So when you're thinking of yourself, you need to have a sense of your own mental well-being. And here I'm going to use sort of like a pharma analogy and say that we need to be able to measure what is your immunity score on it, what are your vitamin levels on it, yeah, and what if any pathologies do you have. So
Mhm.
this is extremely important, along with understanding the rest of you, because it's in understanding the rest of you and how you would react to some situation is the sum total of, gives us a far better, clearer understanding of who you are and how companies need to deal with you, and what kind of job and so on and so forth do you fit into. So things like resilience, grit, which you talked about before, how do you respond to, what is your positivity index? I mean, are you naturally positive, or do you always say, hey, no, so what, this can go wrong? Okay, so we've had 100 rupees today, but tomorrow, it may go. So what kind of person are you? Because that determines your whole, that mental well-being space, right?
Mhm.
And what would depression, anxiety, because these things are so, that's the other pandemic we have right now, don't we? I mean, we know that, Avik, you and I, we worked with a fairly large number of people, and we found that depression scores were around 44%.
Yes.
We
Yes.
just think
And we
about
ran
it.
it across corporates. And this is not just one company. We ran it for companies. We ran
Yeah,
it for at least two back-to-back B2C interventions where it's across sectors, across demographics, across, right? All of those. So it's not just one small cohort or
exactly.
monolithic kind of a population that we're talking about at all.
Yeah,
And these are pretty
44%.
endemic at this point. Mhm.
And we need to know and we need to understand this, because this gives us, and we've used it. So it was happenstance or whatever that we landed up meeting each other, and I found that what Nuva has developed actually addresses all of this. There's nothing else in the market that addresses and speaks to this, and so that's there, and that's how we started using it, and I have
Yes.
found it extremely useful to get a holistic sense and of the person as where you are right now, who you are and where are you right now, and from this adding this whole dimension of mental well-being. And the organizations who've used it has found it very useful because it's helped them do all of these things. They've taken it up and done things around mental well-being. They've done workload reshuffling. They've changed around meeting times and things like that. It's been so. I mean, the usefulness of it is has been enormous. And this is the kind of thing that's required, along with all these new skills that we're talking about, which is innovation, adaptability. These are also things that come from the space within of who you are, along with enabling circumstances and enabling cultures.
Mhm.
But there's a lot that comes from within you. So these are things that we've got to study. These are the kind of tools we need now.
Right, exactly. And Rajesh, on that same note, right, even the initial discussion that we talked about, you said that you were a big advocate of things such as emotional intelligence, and they are coming into their own now. They're coming to the fore now, thankfully, way overdue, but at least there are durust hai. But in terms of how these are actually going to be applied on the ground, I mean, it's chic and it's cool for corporate board members or for monks who've sold their Ferraris, or for gurus of all kinds of denominations to come in and talk about emotional intelligence, right? And really warms the cockles of the heart of the promoters, and they go back and they feel all happy and this nice glow, and then they're coming back the next day and it's the same as usual, right? So how do we actually make this change happen? How do we launch the revolution?
Yeah, I'll probably answer it with a little anecdote. I was doing a series of leadership webinars for the top leadership team of a company, and they left the choice of the subjects to me. And one of the subjects I put up on the table was listening skills, and it sort of met with a lot of eyebrows raised, and why would senior leaders be interested in looking at listening skills. So I had to really strong defense, saying that why I think it's probably the first subject that needs to be put up on the table.
Great.
And they went with it, and they came back with very strong feedback and it created a lot of active and sometimes controversial discussion in the room about how good they thought they were on listening skills. But to your question, Avik, I think just to reiterate a point I made, that it's no longer, if there's one realization that has happened during this pandemic for most people, is that you're looking at the person. And Sanjeev spoke about holistically, you're looking at a whole person. You're not just looking at an employee. And in any case, the power is so much with the employee today, they will not make you look at them as an employee. So the moment you start saying that you're dealing with a whole person there, how well do you know that person? How well do you understand what makes him or her tick? What's going to make that person really feel motivated to deliver his or her best? And that's where those people skills, relationship skills, communication skills all start coming in handy. So in a way, I think it's brought the light back on all those things that really mattered. They always mattered, but it was always shoved under saying, okay, we really need to focus on more important things. But these are the softer things. But I think there's no other better time for now this to really pick up momentum. People want to go beyond the persona and really get down to what are the real issues. And I think, but what perhaps needs to happen, and I'm just building from what Sanjeev said, there has to be a more strategic approach. The whole idea, I know a lot of companies are now talking about launching total wellness programs and looking at not just, individuals set of activities, what they were loosely called employee engagement, that was the sort of
yes, employee engagement programs, employee engagement initiatives.
That could include Diwali prizes and those kind of things, staff
and
engagement,
coupons and vouchers and Tali Bajao and
the Tali Bajao thing. So now people are calling it total. And now how strategic that plan is going to be, whether the metrics going to be in place, whether there's ROI, whether there are going to be key stakeholders who are going to be responsible for that program, that will determine whether there is money is being put where it deserves to be put.
Great. Lovely. I know we're getting towards the end of our time, but we'll probably go over a little bit because there's a bunch of questions and observations from the audience. Let's take up perhaps Jaspal's question first. It's a short one, a very important one. I think at the crux of it, it's talking about work-life balance, right? And is there any study? I mean, whoever wants to go first.
Yeah, Sanjeev, perhaps you've done a lot of work and study.
A lot of study on this. Our surveys show, I mean, let's put a number. If work-life balance was at 3, where 10 is great, 6 months ago, today it's at 4. So it hasn't been like a enormous improvement. Yeah. Within that, what is, and it's gone to 4 because there are some companies which have done amazing things. Okay. And I received an email yesterday from the CHRO of a very, very large global company whose response to me was, today, Wednesday, is the day of digital pause for us. Okay. So you will not find us responding to emails or to messages. If it's that important, call me.
Wow. Okay.
Okay. And it's the same company where if you call after 6 o'clock, they're not going to respond. But they're there at 9. So some people have started figuring, I mean, very enlightened leadership teams and HR folks who really thinking. So they've got, but for the rest of the people, it hasn't been solved. So there is marginal improvement, Jaspal, not a great deal of improvement on this.
Right, exactly. And Jaspal, let me take a stab at it by putting a little bit of a spin around it, a semantic spin, no less. We're talking about work-life balance, and I would argue that this whole concept of work-life balance itself is a misnomer. We should be talking about work-life integration, because by definition, think about anything where you use the word balance, right? So you have work, balance-life, then balance. Think of a balance sheet, right? You have two opposing things. You've got assets and you've got liabilities. Think of a balanced diet, which means if I love my beer and my fries, then I better juxtapose that and counterweigh that with a lot of veggies and fruit juice and keep myself hydrated. Think of a single situation where you're using the word balance, where the two constituent elements are not in opposition. I would wager that there is not a single one. Now, moment we use a term like work-life balance, in the very pronunciation of it, we have proclaimed work and life as enemies of each other. How am I ever going to have a balance? Okay, think about it for a minute. All right. So I'll leave it at that. So possibly work-life integration and not work-life balance. Let's have Chandok's question, because we've got a couple of others as well. It's already 9. Yeah. So Rajesh, Shajibda, whoever wants to. So which
I think
Rajesh
is the closest to it in terms of direct experience. And this is
conducive ecosystem in terms of
expression and creativity. Interesting one.
Building the more conducive ecosystems. I think probably goes back to that whole aspect of vulnerability, and I mean that whole famous Google study that was done years back about creating a psychological space for people to feel free. And I think we talk a lot about it in coaching. And can we create that space for people to really get naked in some ways? Can they really feel safe and comfortable to express themselves fully? And if that space is created in organizations, that becomes almost a starting point for creativity to flourish, because there's no fear there. Because very often the derailers are fear, insecurity. If I say something, it's going to be, people are going to critique me, people are going to judge me for what I'm saying. The moment you have a space where people are allowed, and we all know through experience that creativity flourishes if there are boundaries removed. If there are too many boundaries put in, you're constraining the whole ideation process.
Right.
I jump in with a story,
yeah,
very short story. Yeah, it is. I was working with this very large IT company, which had one of the leaders and one of the pioneers in the outsourcing space. Okay, but over the course of the last at the time that I was working in 3-4 years, they had lost that position and gradually had sort of dropped to 5 or something. And there was a new leader and there was a new leadership team. And so working with them and basically trying to get a sense of what was happening. And one of the exercises we gave out an exercise on test cricket and said, hey, why don't you guys work on what it will take to revive test cricket? Okay. And so discussion happening. This is the leadership team, by the way. The absolute top leadership team of the company. And one person did come up with an idea. I'm not going to, if I get any closer, it will sort of start revealing. And it's the kind of thing that's being done now, by the way. And he was shouted and laughed down and ridiculed. Okay? Within that setup. And so that got us into talking and thinking and discussing about, if this is how you respond within yourself, what is it that you do with anybody else who comes up with an idea? Okay, and where's the respect? And do you therefore allow people to make mistakes? Okay, is that something? I mean, are you going to say that you go ahead and do as I've got your back? How else will people? The process of creativity is a process of risk.
Yeah.
And so how else is it going to happen? So those are the things that's the kind of stuff that leadership has to focus on.
Absolutely. And I'll just add on to what. Yeah, please go ahead.
No, let's just add one more point. And I think this whole point of cricket, and it's so fresh, this whole win, and we've been inundated with all the beautiful messages. But if you just think about it, this whole ecosystem bit, and people are saying Rahane as the captain versus Virat Kohli as the captain, but really it is the ecosystem. I mean, that's been created. If you look at it holistically, and if you look at now the whole softer skills bit, the understanding, the sensitivity, the the culture that has been built in this team. And the coach actually said it. It's just over the last 5-6 years. It's not happened overnight, you know. And then people are talking about not just what was happening to the team. There's the grassroots level. There is Rahul Dravid responsible for creating that young talent. So take a parallel in the corporate space, there has to be an ecosystem. It cannot be today, हाँ चलो एक training program हो गया, and that's the. If you are looking for transformation, then there is a process, and there is an investment in the process. There are stakeholders at every level who are involved in making sure that every single talent is given opportunity to bloom, and the potential is fully exploited for the team. And no wonder you have rookies who have never really played. I heard that Sundar Washington and Natarajan had never played India A ever. So they played domestic cricket, but never featured in any India A tournament, and they are just and they perform. So obviously there's something more going on at a much deeper level than just saying that it was all this aggression, and there was something far more deeper that was being done to create that ecosystem.
Right. Exactly. Just to sort of conclude, I'll give my own 2 pence on that. Let's retain that question again, please. Let's bring up that last question again. Yeah. So in terms of factors, again, now I was thinking while both of you were talking, I think inherently what needs to be there as a kind of platform on which things like creativity and can really flourish is the sense of inquiry. It's a sense of critical inquiry. It's just basic open-mindedness, right? Not just love of learning, which is good in itself, but curiosity about the world. If I have spent 35 years in my sector and I'm a CXO and I've been there and I've done that and I read my Gartner and I read my HBR and I attend international conferences, then I'm unteachable. If I'm unteachable and unimpeachable and untrainable and uncoachable, then I don't see that kind of possibility in my organization, right? So I think a certain amount of and with this, I think very intrinsic to this is a feeling of humility. No matter how big you are, right? I think the pandemic has taught us that there are certain things that are completely beyond our ken, completely beyond our purview and control, right? And if we don't take, I think there is a very important lesson in it to be taken home. And if we don't do that, we're probably missing out on a great opportunity. We'll conclude the session with one last one, because this was an interesting one that I thought. Let's have Abhishek's comment up. It's a comment, but I see an inherent question in it. Yeah, let's just put a question mark at the end, right? So Rajesh, we talked about the ecosystem, and that translates quite well into organizational culture as well. Right? And I think it's both ways, but probably, I don't know, Sanjeev, if you agree with me, it's probably the prerogative of the organization more than the joiner to make sure that the organizational culture is welcoming, is all-encompassing, is enveloping the new joiner and taking that new joiner into the fold, right? How important is that, and how do organizations actually go about doing that?
Okay. Good. You want to go, Rajesh, or I can go?
I'll just make a quick comment on and Sanjeev spoke so much about learning and unlearning and relearning. I had the privilege of hearing the owner of Jaipur Rugs, and we all know there's a case study about him now, Mr. Nand Kishore Chaudhary, and he epitomizes humility. Avik, to your point, and you know what, and his story is fascinating. I mean, the more you read about it, and hearing him was like really sending goose flesh. And he made a beautiful point. He said he's launching an initiative which is calling it the Higher School of Unlearning in his company, because he realizes that if he wants to scale up and he wants to take his whole community of weavers and people along, the first thing that needs to be done is to get people to unlearn what they've learned. I thought, and he said it with great humility, not out of any sheer arrogance or something. And that's the kind of setup and organizational culture that needs to be created.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the key thing that you're saying, Rajesh, is that it's coming from the top.
Yes.
Yeah? And so with new joiners as well, things have to come from the top. So when you're doing an induction with them, this is not something that the senior leadership should say, okay, I've got to do, and this. No, that's what's wrong. Yeah. And this is exactly the most important thing that they have to do. Yeah. The job of senior leadership is building culture and managing culture, right? The leader, that's what, I mean, that's like one major part of the job that they have to do. So senior leaders have to take the responsibility. They have to lead. And culture is not like you can't put down, this is our culture, and say 6 things about it. Okay. Yeah. There are 6 other things that you haven't said, which a person has to experience. And that's where the new joiners experience of it becomes important. So you have to put them through a whole lot of experiences. That's the design that you have to do. Put them through a whole lot of experiences. I mean, other than the induction program, what other work experience do you put them in? What other recreational experience do you put them with? Who do you buddy them up with? That's how it will get transferred. That's how people are going to begin. And you can say anything, but it is about what they see. People will hear what you're saying, but they will do what you do, right? So exactly. The culture is going to happen with people seeing and understanding, okay, this is what works. This is what is value. Okay. If you're in front of the CEO, don't open your mouth. Even the CEO might say that I'm here for questions.
Yes.
Don't open your mouth. Okay. So that's culture. So that's what you got to design the experience, and in these times. And if you're going into hybrid and blended, then you've got to get people in, have them meet, talk, do stuff with people. That's how they will get there. Right. It's not something that will happen. It's not a 6-point thing done over 2 days. It doesn't happen.
Exactly.
It's an imbibing that will happen.
And I think that the biggest challenge, not just with companies in sort of niche sectors and in the SME space, but also large companies, is that there's so much of reliance and dependence when you're talking about policies and procedures and SOPs. And now in a hybrid kind of model, these SOPs are sort of meshed in with the technology, right, and the data and the security and all of that. It really consumes everyone's time. And yet again, the human-centric skills or behavioral skills or soft skills, this becomes something like that, right? In the overall scheme of things, right? I'm in HR, and I have to do this and that and the other, and I'm suddenly put under the spotlight, and I have to lead from the front because we're still very much in the era of pandemic, and going forward again. I think this is something that will continue. That this tends to get, relegated.
Sorry, I want to give one practical idea here. I mean, in terms of what can be, because I've seen this as best practice with an organization which is fantastic at it. The policies, which are an important way in which various things about the culture get. Each of these organizations' policy is prefaced by who we are and what we believe in, and therefore this policy is like this. Okay, it's a very simple thing. It's not like a dry piece of paper which is saying our holiday policy is this. But it starts with saying what's the
this is what we believe.
And our belief.
Therefore, this is our policy. So you're tying it in at every point in time.
Absolutely. It's a fantastic thing to do.
And one quick thing to what Sanjeev you said, I heard the Diageo CHRO talking about it. And he said now the whole trend is about customizing employee experiences. So no longer it's rigid, structured policy. This will be done for this one. It's depending on the age, at what stage the employee is, and what are his or her needs, and literally customizing your experiences and relooking at everything and not making any assumptions about what was the holy grail for all these years has to remain. We are in a different world, and everything has to be then catered to that new world that is being.
Absolutely. And which in itself is a paradigm shift, right? In terms of mindset. We're no longer thinking of employees as cogs in the wheel, but we are really thinking of them as the internal customers, as the first point of contact, right? Within the organization. They have to be happy, and then we go forward and serve our clients and serve our sort of communities and ecosystems.
And literally co-create along with them rather than saying it's a top-down thing and it's
top-down thing instead of it being didactic, right? Ye karna padega, like thou shalt, like
Yeah. It has to be
categorically.
literally come up and co-created along with employees.
Exactly. Wonderful. I didn't realize we've actually got almost 15 minutes over time. It didn't feel like it. This been really, really great. I know that I've learned a lot in talking with both of you, Sanjeev and Rajesh, and I'm sure the viewers joining in have got their share as well. This is just to let you know that on both the Facebook as well as the YouTube links, the recording is going to be there. So in case you've missed it because you've had other commitments, you can always come back to it at a later point of time. Do share, do discuss, because I think things like this, events and sessions like this, are meant to be debated, discussed. Even if you don't agree with whatever we've said, right, or anything that we've said, start a discussion thread, talk about it, debate about it. That's the only reason that we can, that's the only way we can sort of, continue this discourse further and arrive at very creative, innovative solutions. So on that note, thank you very much, Sanjeev, Rajesh.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's absolutely wonderful. This is I also didn't feel it was. I'm a little sad it's ending, actually.
We can have another one. We're going to have another one tomorrow anyway at noon.
Yeah.
All right.
Right.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Good evening. Bye.